Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Dave with Evil Eye Games. Today I'm going to start a tutorial for a third-person cover shooter in Unreal Engine 4. So what are we going to need to get started? Obviously we're going to need Unreal Engine. Currently I'm running build 4.10.4. I'm going to be making use of a photo editing program. I use GIMP. We're going to need a couple of animation packs, in particular Kobold's Rifle Anim Set Pro and the Cover Anim Set Pro. They're not free, but they are available on the UE4 marketplace, and he does sell them separately on his own site. I'm also going to be using a weapons pack, the Sci-Fi Weapons Silver pack. It makes it particularly easy because it includes the weapons, the animations, the meshes, and the particle effects. Alright, so what are we going to be focusing on? The player character is going to be using root motion. Generally speaking, the animations are going to drive the motion of our game character. And obviously the big thing is the ability to move in and out of cover, pop out of cover to fire at enemies, move around the cover, and over the cover. The gameplay is going to be a stage-based shooter, which means that the player is going to select a level when he begins the game, and based on the level he selects, there are going to be certain challenges or different win conditions in order to complete the level. It is going to be a single player game. I'm not going to delve into multiplayer for the course of this tutorial, and it is going to be designed for a desktop environment, particularly because I do not think that the control scheme will translate particularly well to a mobile device. We're also going to be working on the HUD, which obviously is going to display relevant information to the player, but it's also going to provide our menus to navigate the game for the player. And the weapon system that I am going to be using for this is going to be a projectile-based weapon. So it's actually going to fire a virtual projectile into our world, and when it collides, it will interact with what it collides with. It's also going to be a heat-based weapon. So thinking back to Mass Effect 1, firing the weapon generates heat on the weapon. If you continuously fire the weapon, it will continue to build heat, and at a certain point, it will overheat. At that point, the player will have to wait for it to cool down in order to fire it again. I'm also going to cover some level design. It's going to be very basic. I'm also going to make extensive use of level streaming. We're going to be creating basic materials and instances, and I'm going to be using GIMP for this a lot. And we're going to be creating as much of a modular system as possible. Basically, I want components that have options that can be tweaked when they're placed in the environment, rather than rebuilding something over and over again for the game and having to create something new for different aspects of levels. Alright, so to get started, we're going to go ahead first and we're going to create our new project. So we're going to launch Unreal Engine, and we're going to click on New Project, and we want a blank content. We want a desktop console setting, maximum quality, and I'm not going to be using any of the starter content. You can elect to do so if you want, but I'm not going to particularly use anything. I'm going to call this third person cover. Make sure it's in the folder you want to locate it at, and go ahead and click Create Project. Alright, once your new project begins its initial or finishes its initial build, I'm going to go ahead and expand the sources panel over here, and you'll see just an empty content folder. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this game files. So anything universally used by the game, I'm going to put into this folder. Alright, so we're going to create a couple of files for the game. So if you right click on the pane to the right over here, go to Blueprint Class, and the first thing we're going to create is a game instance. So go ahead and highlight that, hit select, and we're going to name it 3p underscore game instance. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to create another blueprint. They actually have a button for it up here. We're going to call this one game mode. So same thing, I'm going to create a 3p underscore game mode. And lastly, I'm going to create one last blueprint for this. And we're going to go searching for a game state. And we're going to call this 3p underscore game state. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Save All. I'm going to create another folder. I'm going to call this Characters. And in this folder, we're going to store all of our information for all the characters in the game, whether it be friendly or foe. Just one nice area to keep it all collected at. So in this Characters folder, I'm going to create a new subfolder. We're going to call this one Player Character. So inside the Player Character folder, we're going to go ahead, create a new blueprint, and we're going to create a player controller. We're going to call this 3p underscore player controller. Also going ahead and create a character. We're going to call this 3p underscore player character. And lastly, I'm going to go into the animation and create an animation blueprint. We don't have a skeleton in place yet, so I'm actually going to hold off on this for a second. So I'll cancel out of that. Go ahead and save everything. Alright, so we're going to have to get some of the files we need. So we're going to go back to the launcher, and we're going to add the Anim Set Pro and the Rifle Set Pro. So we're going to select the Add to Project for the Anim Set Pro. We're going to select the project we're working on and click on Add to Project. We're going to do the same thing with the Rifle Anim Set Pro. Alright, so once those are finished, we're going to see over here that the Cover Anim Set Pro and the Rifle Anim Set Pro are both present. Sometimes UE4 can be a little finicky. If they don't show up right away, you're going to probably have to close out the project and relaunch it, and they will most likely show up in there. Now inside of these folders, you're going to see that there's a UE4 mannequin under each one. Now we're only going to need one of these. So very first thing is we're going to go ahead and delete one. I found some issues with deleting the Rifle Anim Set Pro mannequin. So we're going to delete the one under the Cover Anim Set Pro. So just right click on that folder and delete. And it's going to come up with this. It's going to say, hey, are you sure? We want to click Force Delete. We're going to go ahead and click Save All. And the other thing we're going to want to take a look at here is there's a blend space folder in the Cover Anim Set Pro that we're not going to use. So we're going to right click on that and delete that as well. Under the Rifle Anim Set Pro, there is a maps pack. We're not going to need that. So we're going to go ahead and delete that. And that's just a demo map of all the poses. And this blend space one here, we're not going to use the rifle stand aim. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And I want to move this blend spaces into the animation folder. Alright, so that's pretty much all of the file cleanup right now. So I want to take this animations folders and put them into the characters folder. So I'm going to click, drag, and drop into the characters folder and click move folder here. Once that's completed, we're going to do the same thing for the Cover Anim Set Pro. Drop it right into that characters folder. And lastly, we're going to drag this UE4 mannequin folder into the characters folder as well. And then once we're done, we can delete both the Rifle Anim Set Pro and the Cover Anim Set Pro folders as well. For some reason, when deleting assets in UE4, you might have to do it twice. So the Cover Anim Set Pro folder we'll also get rid of. Alright, and the one last thing we're going to have to take a look at is making sure that all these are rigged up to the same skeleton. So you notice if you go into the aim offsets, there's going to be a lot of blacked out images here. So we want to highlight all of those. right click, retarget anim assets, and retarget skeleton on existing anim assets. And you're going to see the one UE4 mannequin in here. We're going to select that one, and all of a sudden we're going to have these images available. We're going to go to the in-place motion animations. We're going to see the same thing. And you want to make sure you get all of them. Same thing, we're going to right click, retarget anim assets, and retarget skeleton. Select the mannequin, and it'll retarget all of that. And then one last time for the root motion. And you want to make sure there aren't any lurkers in there at the end that are going to mess it, but it doesn't look like there are. So at this point we can click Save All. At this point it looks like we're good to go. So we're going to go back to our player character folder. At this point we can go ahead and create the animation blueprint. And we're going to use the UE4 mannequin skeleton. And we're going to call this 3P underscore player anim BP. So we're going to hit Save All. First thing we're going to deal with is the player controller. So if we open up the player controller here, we're going to go to the event graph. And one thing we have to do first is go to our project settings and go to input. And we're going to need to add some inputs so that we can move and look around. So under access mappings, we're going to go ahead and add 4 new access mappings. And the first one, we're going to call this one Move Forward. This will be our forward and backward motion. We're going to want 2 different inputs for this. We're going to use the standard keyboard layout, the WASD. So W is for forward, S is for back. And we're going to want to set the S as a -1, as it's going to be the opposite of the forward motion. The second one we're going to create is going to be move right. Same thing, we're going to want 2 inputs here. 1 for left, 1 for right. So we're going to use the A key to move left, and we're going to use the D key to move right. Now the right motion is going to be a positive digit, so we're going to make the A key a -1. Now we're going to want to add our mouse look. So the first one we're going to create is our mouse pitch. And we're going to use the mouse Y. And I'm going to set this to -1. We're going to cover inverting the mouse look in the game settings later. But for now, your standard look is going to be -1. The positive Y is in the down direction. And we're also going to add our mouse yaw. We're going to make this the mouse in the X direction, and we're fine to leave it at 1. One other thing we want to do while we're in here is we're going to want to go into maps and modes, and we're going to set our default game mode to our 3P game mode. So we can go ahead and close that. You don't have to save it because it automatically saves. And while we're still looking at it, I'm going to open up the game files and open up our game mode. And you'll notice over here to the right, you're going to have a default pawn. We're going to set that to our 3P player character. We haven't created a HUD yet, so we can't change that. The character controller is going to be the 3P player controller. We're not worrying about spectator stuff. The game state, we're going to change over to our 3P game state. Compile, save, and we can close that. So back at our player controller, we're going to have to get our inputs here. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to put in move forward, and we want to take the axis event. And then we want to do the same thing for move right. Once again, the axis event. We're going to do mouse pitch and mouse yaw. Alright, so we have our 4 inputs that we just added. We can compile and save. The move forward is going to be pretty straightforward. We're just going to promote this to a variable, and we're going to call this move forward. The right, we're going to do the same thing too. Promote to a variable, and move right is going to be the name of the variable. Now, for the mouse, I want to add in 2 more variables that we can use later for some settings. First off, I'm going to add a boolean that's going to be called invert mouse, and I'm going to add another one that is going to be mouse sensitivity. Did I spell that right? And the mouse sensitivity is going to be a float. So we're going to compile that. The invert mouse I'm going to leave at the default value of false. And the mouse sensitivity I'm going to set to a default value of 1. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to do a little bit of logic here to calculate the mouse sensitivity. So we're going to take the mouse sensitivity value, we're going to multiply it by the axis value, and then we're also going to throw it in a branch. And we're going to take our inverse mouse setting, and if invert mouse is set to true, we're going to do one of 2 things. So for the mouse pitch, we're going to have to put in a input pitch. So add input pitch. I'm going to copy that, and we're going to go true here, false here. And what's going to happen here is if our inverse mouse is set to false, we just want this value. But if we want to invert the mouse, we're going to want to multiply it by a float, and we're going to want it to be -1. So we invert that value. And then we're going to do something very similar with the mouse Y. So we're going to get our mouse sensitivity. We're going to multiply these 2 together. We're going to put in a branch. Multiply this by -1. And instead of add pitch input, we're going to add yaw input. So same deal. Connect up all those pins. Make it look a little pretty. And I'm going to add some comment boxes. So go ahead and add a comment box here. Call this movement input. And this is going to be mouse input. At this point, we can go ahead and compile and save. And we're going to be done with the third player controller for now. So we're going to go back to our characters folder. in our player character, and we're going to go ahead and open up our third player anim blueprint. And we're going to have to get some variables first. We're not going to need the pawn owner just yet, but I'm going to start this off with a sequence, which will be useful later. I'm not going to use it right now, but we're going to go ahead and get player controller. Now, it's a single player game, so we don't need to be worried about this. It's just going to be player index 0. And we want to get move forward. Oh, I forgot to cast it, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to cast to our third person player controller that we created. And as the third person player controller, we're going to go ahead and get move forward. And we're also going to get move right. And then each of these we're going to promote to a variable, and we're going to name them respectively move forward and move right. And we're going to go ahead and connect these pins up. And we'll just neaten it up a little bit. So that's all we're going to need for now. Compile, save, and then we're going to go over to the anim graph, and we're going to go ahead and right click, and we're going to make a new state machine. We're going to go ahead and connect that up. And we're going to go into our state machine by double clicking on it. So we're going to go over to our asset browser, and we're going to find the asset that's named Classic Rifle Strafe Movement and drag it out here. I'm going to call it Rifle Walk. This is going to be pretty straightforward. You just want to drag from the entry point over to this Rifle Walk and let go. Now if we go to the actual Rifle Walk segment here, we have two inputs, one for the walk right and one for the walk forward. So we go back to the My Blueprint, we're going to get our move forward, we're going to get our move right, and we're going to go ahead and plug those in. You can compile and save. You're going to see over to the left here, the character is all of a sudden animated. It's creating a preview. One thing we want to make sure of while we're looking at this too is under the Anim Preview Editor tab down here, under Edit Defaults, we want to make sure that this is set to root motion from everything in the root motion mode, and compile and save that. And I'm going to double click on this Classic Rifle Strafe movement here, and this is what we're looking at as far as the pre-built blend space. Now, one thing we're going to want to do here is change the target weight interpolation speed per second as well. What this does is it blends the animations more smoothly together. I've tried a couple different settings already. I personally like 7. If you lower this down to like a 5, it'll be even smoother, but the controls, at least in my opinion, feel rather sluggish. So I'm going to use 7 for this. You can play around with it and see what you like particularly better. The other thing I want to change while I'm in here are the anim notifies. We're not going to really use this right now. We want to change this over to highest weighted animation, and that's something we want to get into the habit of doing because we are going to be using notifies later on, and it will be important, especially when we're getting into footstep sounds. So we can go ahead and click save on that. Back over at the graph, we can back out, and we should be all good to go on this point. So we can exit out of the Anim BP, and we're going to want to real quick go back into our player character, and we're going to want to set this up. So we're going to go into mesh first off. We're going to select from the skeletal mesh drop down our mannequin, and we're going to want to drop him into place. And we're going to make sure he kind of lines up with the bottom of the capsule here. And then we're going to want to rotate him so he faces the same direction as his arrow. That looks pretty good. And then over under the animation, we can go ahead and the blueprint we can select is the one we just finished working on. The 3P. Alright, sorry about that. I got a little interrupted there. So as I was saying, you just want to make sure that the anim blueprint we're using is the one we created earlier, the 3P player anim BP. And you'll see our character is now animated. So we're going to go compile and save. We're also going to add a couple of components to our character. We're going to add a spring arm. And we're going to add a camera. Now we want to make sure that the camera is parented to the spring arm. So you're going to click and drag the camera onto the spring arm. And if you look in the viewport here, the camera is going to be attached to the end of that spring arm. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move the spring arm up a little bit here. I'm going to shorten the target arm length down to about 150. And I'm going to create a offset for the socket, which is going to move the camera about 50. We're going to compile and save. And one thing we want to do here is we want to make sure use pawn control rotation is checked. You can compile and save at that point. And if we go back to our map and we hit play, we're able to look up and down, left and right, and the player rotates with us. We move forward, backwards, right, and left. One thing I want to change up in here that I'm not a huge fan of is we go to the animation blueprint. We're going to find our rifle walk state and this classic rifle strafe movement. And the shape of this is a little weird to me. I'm going to drag these corner pieces all the way out. The movement just doesn't feel right to me. So I'm going to make it an inner square and an outer square. So we're going to go ahead and save that. We don't have to compile this again, but I'm going to do it anyway. So we hit play. And it looks like we're floating a little bit too. It's a little hard to tell from this angle, but it does kind of seem like we might be floating just a tad. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our character, and I think we're going to drop the mesh down just a tiny bit. So maybe 1. Let's see how that looks. That looks a lot better in my opinion. So that's going to conclude this first video. I will continue to make these videos. Next, I think we're going to start working on our aim offsets. And we'll see what else I can get into that episode. So thanks for watching.